He built this house for me before he built it for anyone else.
Sir, I need to tell you something. I should have told you a long time ago.
Your mother is malnourished.
You have always been a good son.
The old woman's feet touched the cold tiles before the clock struck 2. She moved the way people move when they have learned that silence is survival. Slowly, deliberately, one hand trailing the wall for balance, the other clutching the edge of her wrapper tight against her chest. The house was dark. The children were asleep. Her son was asleep. And Adiz, her son's wife, was asleep too, deep and unbothered. The way people sleep when their conscience has made peace with what their hands have done. Mama Okafor reached the kitchen. She did not turn on the light. She knew this kitchen the way you know a place you are not supposed to be, by feel, by memory, by the particular shame of needing to be there at all. Her fingers found the handle of the pot on the back burner. The small one. The one that was always left for her. She lifted the lid and looked inside. Cold rice. A thin film of stew at the bottom. One piece of meat. Small, mostly bone. Sitting at the edge like an afterthought. She did not sigh. She did not cry. She took a plate from the rack, spooned out what was there, and stood at the kitchen counter eating in the dark. Standing up. Because by the time she sat down and got back up again, her knees would scream at her, and she could not afford to wake anyone. She ate slowly, chewing carefully, tasting almost nothing. When the plate was clean, she rinsed it quietly, dried it with the edge of her wrapper, placed it back exactly where she had found it, and walked back to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed. She looked at her hands in the darkness. Hands that had once cooked for a village. Hands that had kneaded dough at 4 in the morning to sell before school runs. Hands that had fed her son through university with nothing but those hands and the grace of God. She pressed them together, and she prayed. Not loudly, just a breath, just a whisper into the dark. Father, thank you for today. That was all. She lay down, and the house kept sleeping, completely unaware that the woman who had built the man who built this house was quietly, invisibly, disappearing inside it. Before we go any further, let me stop and pray for you. I don't think you found this video by accident today. I believe God has a word for someone watching this right now, and I don't want to walk past that moment. Father, in the name of Jesus, I pray for every person watching this who has ever been made to feel invisible in a place that was supposed to love them. Every person who has sat at a table and been given the least, or been forgotten entirely. Every person who has swallowed their pain in silence because they did not want to cause trouble. Lord, I pray for every child who is far away right now, trusting that someone is taking care of their mother, and that trust has not been honored. I pray for every elderly parent sitting somewhere quiet tonight, eating alone, smiling when anyone checks, saying I'm fine, when they are not fine. God, you see them. You have always seen them. Let your comfort be so real in their lives that they feel it like a warm hand on a cold night. And for the person watching who is guilty, who has overlooked someone in their care, let this be the day that changes. Let this video be the moment the eyes open. In Jesus' name, if you received that prayer, type amen in the comments right now. I mean it, type it. Let somebody see your faith today. Now, let me take you back into this story, because it is only just beginning. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your country or your city in the comments. I love knowing who is in this family. And if you are not subscribed yet, do that right now. You will not want to miss how this ends. His name was Chukwuemeka Okafor, but everyone called him Emeka, and Emeka was the kind of man who made people feel safe just by walking into a room. He was 44 years old, broad-shouldered, with his mother's eyes and his father's stubbornness. Though his father had died when Emeka was 11, leaving those two qualities to fight each other inside him for the rest of his life. He had built something from nothing. A logistics company that now employed 60 people. A house in a good neighborhood with a gate and a garden and a generator that never ran out of fuel. He had done all of it for his family. He had done most of it, if he was honest, for his mother. Mama Okafor, Chioma to those who had known her young, was 67 years old and had the kind of face that made strangers trust her immediately. Deep-set eyes that had seen too much and forgiven too easily. A smile that arrived slowly but stayed long. She had raised Emeka alone after his father died. selling firewood, selling food, taking in other people's laundry, doing whatever the day asked of her without complaint. She had put Emeka through secondary school on 200 Nigerian nairas a day and through university on prayers and borrowed money and a stubbornness that she passed directly into her son's bones. When Emeka built the house, he did not think twice. "Mama is coming to live with us," he told Adiz. It was not a question. Adiz had smiled. "Of course," she said. "She is my mother too." That was 7 years ago. Adiz Okafor was 41, and she was the kind of beautiful that made people lower their guard. Smooth-skinned, well-dressed, with a laugh that filled a room and a warmth in public that everyone remarked on. At church, she was on the welfare committee. In the neighborhood, she was the one who organized the Christmas party. She brought food when people were sick. She remembered birthdays. She was, by every visible measure, a good woman. She had come into the marriage with 3 children, Tabena, 14, Samto, 11, and little Chidinma, 8. Emeka had accepted them without hesitation. He treated them as his own. He paid their school fees, attended their school plays, helped with homework on the nights he came home early enough. He was, in that way, more of a father to them than their biological father had ever been. But Adiz's children were Adiz's children. And Mama Okafor, despite being the reason this house existed, despite being the woman whose sacrifices had made Emeka's success possible, was simply a guest who had stayed too long. That was how Adiz saw it. She had never said this out loud. She was far too careful for that. But it was the quiet truth that organized everything inside that house: who ate first, who ate well, who ate it all. Ngozi was 19 and had been working in the Okafor house for 2 years. She was from Imo State, the third of 6 children, sent to the city by a mother who needed one less mouth to feed and one more person bringing in money. She was quiet by nature and had become quieter still in the Okafor house, because Adiz had a way of making the walls feel like they were listening. Ngozi swept and mopped and washed and cooked when she was asked to cook, and she kept her eyes down and her observations to herself, because she had learned early that girls like her, girls without connections, without leverage, without anywhere else to go, survived by seeing everything and saying nothing. She had been seeing things in this house for months. The rhythm of the household was this. Emeka left the house by 6:30 in the morning, sometimes earlier. He returned between 7 and 9 in the evening, tired, grateful for quiet, trusting that the home he had built was running the way he had imagined it. Adiz managed everything inside those walls. The food, the schedule, the children's school runs, the housekeeping. She managed it with the efficiency of someone who understood that control, exercised quietly enough, looks exactly like love. Mama Okafor had tried, at first, to be useful. She had woken early to help in the kitchen. She had tried to take over the cooking on Sundays. Her jollof rice was legendary, the kind that made grown men close their eyes when they tasted it. But Adiz had been gentle and firm. "Mama, please rest. You've worked enough in your life. This is your time to rest." Sounded like love. Felt like a door closing. Within 3 months of moving in, Mama Okafor had been quietly removed from every function in the house. She did not cook. She did not shop. She did not know what was in the refrigerator or what was planned for dinner or whether there was enough food in the house for the week. She was fed when feeding happened, given what was given, and expected to be grateful, and she was always grateful. That was what made it so easy to do to her. The first evening Ngozi truly understood what was happening. She was standing at the kitchen sink washing the children's lunch plates when Adiz began cooking dinner. There were 2 pots. This was not unusual. Ngozi had seen it before but not thought much of it. She had assumed it was just the way the woman organized cooking. Pot for rice. Pot for soup. Normal. But that evening she watched more carefully. The first pot, large, heavy, set on the front burner, was filled with a rich tomato stew. Ngozi could smell the crayfish from across the kitchen, could see the thick oil shimmering on the surface, the chunks of beef and goat meat and stockfish layered at the bottom. Adiz stirred it with the satisfaction of a woman who knew she had cooked something good. She tasted it twice, adjusted the seasoning, covered it and left it to simmer. Then she turned to the second pot, smaller, set on the back burner. She opened the refrigerator and took out a container of leftover soup from 2 days ago. She poured it into the small pot, added a splash of water, turned the heat to low. That was Mama Okafor's dinner. Ngozi stood very still at the sink. When the food was ready, Adiz served the children first. She called them by name, one by one. Tabena, Samto, Chidinma, and they came running and sat at the table, and she spooned their plates with the generosity of a woman who loved her children fiercely, completely without reservation. Rice piled high, stew thick and gleaming, meat on every plate more than enough. She cut the biggest piece of beef and put it on Chidinma's plate because Chidinma was the youngest, and that is what mothers do for their youngest. Then she called Mama Okafor. Mama, food is ready. Mama Okafor came out of her room in her housecoat, moving slowly, smiling when she saw the children eating. My babies, she said softly, stopping to touch Tabena's shoulder as she passed. Tabena did not look up from his phone. She sat at the far end of the table. Adiz brought her plate. Small. The leftover soup, reheated, watery, the color faded from whatever it had once been. A modest hill of rice. No meat, or rather, one small piece, the kind you find at the bottom of a pot, more tendon than flesh. Here you go, Mama. Eat well. Thank you, my daughter. God bless you. Adiz smiled, went back to the kitchen, served herself a full plate, the good food, the fresh stew, and sat down with her children. Mama Okafor ate what she was given. She did not look at anyone else's plate. She ate slowly and quietly, and when she was done, she said, "That was nice," and carried her plate to the kitchen, and rinsed it herself and went back to her room. Ngozi watched all of it. She went to her own room that night and lay on her mattress on the floor and stared at the ceiling and told herself it was not her business. She told herself maybe Mama preferred lighter food. She told herself maybe there was a reason. She told herself many things. But she had seen the 2 pots. 3 days later, she saw it again. Different food, same arrangement. Fresh egusi for the table. Leftover ofonugbu, thinned with water, for the back burner. Children eating loudly. Mama eating quietly. The same small plate. The same gracious smile. A week after that, Ngozi was washing vegetables at the sink when Adiz came in and began organizing the refrigerator. She watched Adiz move containers with practiced efficiency, pushing the older food to one side, the side closest to the small pot shelf. Organizing the children's snacks, juice boxes, yogurt cups, chin-chin in a sealed container. On the top shelf, unreachable to an elderly woman whose knees made bending difficult. Ngozi, Ma, if Mama asks you for anything from the kitchen between meals, tell her I said she should wait for dinner. The doctor said she needs to eat on a schedule. Adiz said this without turning around, still organizing. Her voice was smooth and even and completely without guilt. Ngozi swallowed. Yes, Ma. There was no doctor, no schedule. Ngozi knew this because she was the one who accompanied Mama Okafor to her last medical appointment, and the doctor had said nothing of the sort. He had said Mama needed to eat consistently, regularly, and well. But Ngozi said nothing. There was one evening, a Tuesday, Ngozi would never forget it, when Emeka came home early. It was rare. Some days a meeting ended early or a client canceled, and Emeka would walk through that gate before 7, filling the house with a different kind of energy. Warmer, louder, his presence like a light switched on. The children would run to him. He would scoop Chidinma up and ask Tabena about school and ruffle Samto's hair, and the house would feel, for a few hours, like the family it was supposed to be. That Tuesday, Adiz heard his car before Ngozi did. Ngozi watched the shift happen in real time. Adiz moved from the back burner to the front burner in one smooth motion. She took a proper plate, not the small one, and scooped a full, generous serving of the good soup. She cut a large piece of meat. She carried it to the table and set it in front of Mama Okafor's chair just as Mama was coming out of her room, drawn by the sound of the gate. Mama, come and eat. I made your favorite, Of Aku. Mama's face lit up. Of Aku? You made Of Aku for me? Of course. Sit down, sit down. Emeka walked in. She had survived a husband's death, a decade of poverty, a flood that destroyed her market stall, a landlord who raised the rent 3 times in 1 year, and a son who almost dropped out of university because the money ran out. She had survived all of it on faith and stubbornness and a deep, unshakable belief that if she kept putting one foot in front of the other, God would meet her somewhere on the road. And he had. He had given her Emeka, and Emeka had given her this house. She had come here with gratitude so deep it felt like it lived in her bones. She had told herself she would not be a burden. She would help where she could. She would be useful. She would take up as little space as possible and give as much warmth as she could. And she would be grateful, grateful, grateful every single day. And so when Adiz began removing her from the kitchen, she did not fight it. When the portions began shrinking, she told herself she did not need much. She was old, she was less active, she did not need the way a young person needs. When the food became cold and thin and leftover, she told herself at least there was food. At least she had a roof. At least her son was safe and well. She was a woman who had spent her whole life making the best of what she was given, and so she made the best of this too. But her body did not care about her gratitude. Her body was keeping score. By the 4th month, her wrapper hung differently on her frame. By the 5th, she had punched a new hole in her belt. Her hands shook when she lifted things that had never felt heavy before. She grew tired more quickly. She slept more, not because she was resting well, but because her body was rationing its energy, shutting down what wasn't essential, conserving what was left. She noticed. She said nothing. She wrote a letter instead. She sat at the small desk in her room, in the afternoon when the house was quiet, and she wrote it in her careful, slightly looping handwriting, the handwriting of a woman who had taught herself to write because no one had made school easy for her. She wrote to Emeka. She did not accuse anyone. She did not name Adiz. She simply said, "My son, I want you to know that whatever happens, I am proud of you. From the first day you came into this world, you have been the reason I kept going. I do not want to be a problem in your home. I never want to be the reason there is trouble between you and your wife. So I am writing this just in case. Just so that you know, I love you, and I am proud of you. And if anything happens to me, please do not blame yourself. You are a good son. You have always been a good son." She folded the letter in 4, slid it into her Bible, between the Psalms and the Proverbs, where she prayed every morning, just in case. Her name was Mrs. Nwachukwu, and she had known Chioma Okafor for 31 years. They had met on Umuzila Street when they were both young mothers with too many problems and not enough money, and the friendship that had grown between them was the kind that does not need constant tending. The kind that picks up exactly where it left off no matter how much time passes between visits. Mrs. Nwachukwu was 56, sharp-eyed, broad, with a laugh that startled birds and a tongue that had never learned the art of diplomacy. She said what she saw, always had. It had cost her friendships over the years, but it had also made her the person people called when they needed the truth. She visited the Okafor house on a Saturday afternoon in the 5th month of what nobody was yet calling anything. Adiz welcomed her warmly at the door, genuinely warm, because Mrs. Nwachukwu was one of those women you instinctively knew not to be cold to. They hugged. Adiz offered her food, cold drinks, chin-chin in a glass bowl. The children came to greet her. Everything looked exactly the way a happy home is supposed to look. Then Mama Okafor came out of her room. Mrs. Nwachukwu stood up immediately. "Chioma, Ada na." Mama Okafor opened her arms and they held each other, and Mrs. Nwachukwu felt it immediately. The way you feel it when you hug someone and there is less of them than there used to be. She pulled back and looked at her friend. Really looked. Mama Okafor's face was thinner. The fullness that had always lived in her cheeks, the fullness that had survived poverty and widowhood and every hard season, was receding. Her eyes were bright still, alert still, but there were shadows under them that had not been there at Christmas. Her neck was thinner. Her wrists were thinner. "Chioma," Mrs. Nwachukwu said carefully. "Have you been eating?" Mama Okafor waved her hand. "Ha, don't mind me. Old age. You know how it is, when you get to our age, the body starts returning things it borrowed." She laughed. Mrs. Nwachukwu did not laugh with her. They sat together on the small sofa in Mama's room and talked for 2 hours, about the old street, about people they both knew, about Emeka's success, about the children, about God's faithfulness. Mama Okafor was animated, present herself. But twice during the conversation, Mrs. Nwachukwu noticed her pause mid-sentence, as if she had lost the thread. Not from confusion, but from a tiredness that went deeper than words. And once, when Mama Okafor reached across to pick up her cup of tea, her hand shook so badly that the tea sloshed to one side. She laughed it off immediately. "These hands," she said. "They've worked too hard." Mrs. Nwachukwu said nothing, but she filed it away. Later, in the kitchen, she watched Adiz preparing the evening meal. She sat at the kitchen table under the pretense of keeping her company, talking lightly about neighborhood gossip, watching with the patient, peripheral attention of a woman who had raised 5 children and could track 3 things at once without appearing to pay attention to any of them. She saw the 2 pots. She watched Adiz ladle the fresh stew, rich, fragrant, the kind that made the whole kitchen smell alive, into the big pot. She watched her open the refrigerator, take out a container of something older, smell it briefly, deem it acceptable, and pour it into the small pot on the back burner. She watched Adiz's face while she did this. There was no guilt in it, no hesitation, the ease of someone performing a task so routine it had stopped requiring thought. Mrs. Nwachukwu kept talking. She kept her face pleasant and open. She did not let a single thing she was thinking show on her face, because she was a woman who understood that the most dangerous thing you can do when you have discovered something is let the person who is doing it know that you have discovered it. She left the house at 6:30, before dinner was served. She hugged Adiz goodbye. She held Mama Okafor's thin hands in both of hers for a moment longer than necessary. "I'll be back soon," she said. Soon. She drove herself home. She called her daughter in London. She talked for 40 minutes. And then she sat in her car outside her own gate and said out loud to nobody, "Something is very wrong in that house." She picked up her phone. She almost called Emeka. She put the phone down. She picked it up again. No, not yet. She needed to be sure. She needed to see it again. She would go back, unannounced this time, and she would see what she needed to see. She would not wait long. It was Emeka himself who began to feel it first, though he did not yet know what he was feeling. It started as something he could not name. A discomfort that lived at the edge of his awareness, surfacing in small moments and disappearing before he could grab it. He noticed that his mother had stopped coming to sit with him after dinner. She used to do this, wait for him in the sitting room, bring him a cup of tea, sit with him while he unwound from the day. She would tell him small things, something she had seen on television, something one of the children had said, a prayer she wanted to share with him. He had loved those quiet 20 minutes more than he had ever told her. They had stopped. He had not noticed when. He had assumed she was sleeping earlier because of her age, and he had not questioned it, because Adiz had mentioned once that the doctor said Mama needed more rest. He also noticed that his mother seemed to disappear from the dinner table earlier and earlier. She would eat, quickly, quietly, and excuse herself before the meal was even fully over. He had attributed this to her being tired. Old people got tired. It was normal. But one evening, a Wednesday unremarkable in every other way, Emeka came home to an empty house. Adiz had taken the children to a school event. Ngozi was at the back of the house washing clothes. The sitting room was quiet. He was hungry. He went to the kitchen. He opened the big pot first, empty, cleaned, already put away for the night. He opened the refrigerator. He saw leftover rice from the afternoon. He looked around the kitchen and noticed the small pot on the back burner that was always there, always slightly apart from the main cooking, always in that particular spot. He lifted the lid. He looked at what was inside. He dipped a spoon and tasted it. He stood very still. It was soup, technically, but it was thin in a way that good soup does not become unless it has been watered down or has been sitting for too long. The flavor was flat. The color was faded. There was a small piece of meat at the bottom of the pot, the kind of piece that ends up in a pot only because it was too small to put on a plate. He looked at the pot for a long time. He put the lid back. He went to the refrigerator. He looked at the containers inside, properly for the first time in years, with the eyes of a man who was now paying attention. He saw the children's snacks on the top shelf. He saw the containers of good food, covered and labeled. and on the bottom shelf, pushed to the back, a container with a small piece of foil on top, older food, the kind that gets used to refill a certain small pot on a certain back burner. He closed the refrigerator. He did not say anything that night. Adiz came home with the children, loud and cheerful, full of stories from the school event. He sat with them. He laughed when he was supposed to laugh. He ate the dinner Adiz reheated for him, good food, fresh food, the kind that had never seen the back burner. But something had shifted behind his eyes. He started watching. Not obviously. Emeka was his mother's son, and his mother had survived 30 years of difficult circumstances partly because she knew how to observe without being observed. He watched the kitchen. He watched the timing of meals. He watched what went onto each plate. He watched his mother's plate in particular, what was on it, how much, where it had come from. He watched for 1 week. By the end of that week, he knew. He had not been able to fully admit it to himself yet. There is a particular kind of pain that comes when the person you love most in the world has been wronged inside the protection you built for them. It is not just anger. It is something older and heavier. It is the horror of having failed the one person whose safety was your most sacred responsibility. Emeka was not ready to hold that feeling yet, but his eyes were open now. And once eyes open, they do not close again. On a Thursday morning, 6 months into what nobody had named, Ngozi knocked on Mama Okafor's door at 7:30 and received no answer. She knocked again. Nothing. She pressed her ear to the door. Silence, but a thick silence, not an empty one. The kind of silence that has weight. She opened the door. Mama Okafor was on the floor. She was conscious. Her eyes were open, blinking slowly, tracking Ngozi's face as she rushed in. But she could not get up. She had gotten out of bed to go to the bathroom and her legs had simply stopped cooperating. She was sitting on the cold floor in her nightgown, her back against the side of the bed, her hands in her lap, looking up at Ngozi with an expression that broke Ngozi completely open, because it was not panic and it was not fear. It was embarrassment. "Don't shout," Mama Okafor said immediately. "Please, don't wake anyone. Just help me up." "Mama, I'm fine. I just slipped. Don't make noise, Ngozi. Please." "Mama, you didn't slip. Ngozi's voice cracked. She dropped to her knees on the floor beside the old woman. "How long have you been here?" A pause. "Since 5. It was 7:30. She had been on the floor for 2.5 hours, too weak to get up, not wanting to call for help. Ngozi called Emeka. He answered on the second ring and arrived home in under 20 minutes, still in his work clothes, having turned around halfway to the office. He walked into his mother's room and saw her sitting on the bed where Ngozi had managed to get her. And his face did something that Ngozi had never seen it do before. It broke. Just for a second. Just a flash. Before he composed himself and went to his mother's side and took her hands and said, "Mama, I'm here. I'm here." They took her to the hospital. The doctor was a calm man in his 40s with reading glasses and the measured manner of someone who had delivered difficult news enough times to know that the most important thing is not to soften it too much. He examined Mama Okafor. He ran tests. He came out to the waiting room where Emeka sat alone. Adiz had been called but had not yet arrived, and he sat down across from him. "Your mother is malnourished," he said. "Significantly. Not dangerously so at this moment. But if it had continued another month, we would be having a much more serious conversation. She is also dehydrated. Her body has been running on very little for quite some time." Emeka did not speak. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly," the doctor continued. "Is she eating at home?" The question landed in Emeka's chest like something physical. He thought of the small pot on the back burner, the watered-down soup, the container pushed to the back of the refrigerator, the plate Ngozi had described once, before she stopped herself mid-sentence, catching herself saying too much. He thought of his mother on the floor of her room at 5 in the morning, too weak to stand, too proud to call for help. "I don't know," he said, and it was the truest, most devastating thing he had said in years. The doctor nodded slowly. "She needs to eat, consistently, generously, regularly. Full meals, protein. She needs someone ensuring that she is eating, Not just that food is available, but that she is actually eating it and eating enough. Can you make sure that happens? Yes, Emeka said. His voice was very quiet. I will make sure. He sat in that waiting room for 45 minutes before Adiz arrived. And in those 45 minutes he did not look at his phone. He did not move. He sat with his hands clasped between his knees, and he thought about his mother eating cold food alone in a dark kitchen at 2 in the morning, and he thought about the letter she had never sent him, and he thought about what kind of son lets that happen inside his own house. He thought about Ngozi. When Adiz arrived, breathless, concerned, perfectly costumed in the role of worried daughter-in-law, Emeka looked at her for a long moment and said nothing. He let her hug him. He let her ask questions. He answered in short, flat sentences. And then he said, I need to go check on Ngozi, and walked back into the hospital. He found Ngozi sitting in the corridor outside Mama's room, her hands folded in her lap, staring at the floor with the expression of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and no longer has the strength to pretend it isn't heavy. He sat down next to her. Ngozi. She looked up. Tell me what happens at home. She looked back down at her hands. She was quiet for so long that he thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she took a breath, the kind of breath that comes before a decision, and she told him. She told him about the 2 pots. She told him about the leftover food reheated for the back burner. She told him about the doctor's instructions that Adiz had invented, the ones about Mama needing to eat on a schedule, the ones used to stop Ngozi from giving Mama anything between meals. She told him about the night she had found Mama in the kitchen at almost 2 in the morning, eating cold rice standing up in the dark. She told him about Mama's face when she saw her in the hallway. She told him what Mama had said. Go and sleep, my daughter. It's cold. By the time Ngozi finished, she was crying silently, tears running down her face, not bothering to wipe them. She kept her eyes down. Her voice had been steady throughout. The steadiness of someone who has rehearsed this confession in their head many times, never knowing if they would ever get to say it. I'm sorry, she said finally. I should have told you sooner. I was afraid. I didn't know what she would do to me if I said something. I'm sorry, sir. I'm so sorry. Emeka was quiet for a very long time. You have nothing to be sorry for, he said at last. His voice was controlled but barely. Nothing. Do you understand me? None of this is your fault. He stood up. He straightened his jacket. He walked back to the waiting room where his wife was sitting with her hands folded and her face arranged into an expression of appropriate concern. He stood in front of her. Emeka. Not here, he said quietly. We will talk at home. The house was quiet when they got back. The children had been taken to a neighbor's house. It was just the 2 of them in the sitting room. Emeka standing near the window, Adiz on the sofa, and the silence between them was the kind that comes before a storm, when everything goes very still and the air changes quality entirely. Adiz spoke first. Emeka, I know what you're thinking, but, do you? He turned from the window. His voice was calm. That was the thing that would stay with Adiz longest afterward, how calm he was. Not cold. Not shouting. Calm in the way that still water is calm. Depth beneath it. Movement beneath it. Something enormous and unhurried living just below the surface. Whatever Ngozi told you, that girl has had a problem with me since she came to this house. She has never liked me. She. Adiz. He said her name once quietly, and she stopped. He walked to the kitchen. She followed. He opened the refrigerator and pointed to the bottom shelf. The container pushed to the back, older food, the kind used to fill the small pot. What is this? That's Mama's food. She prefers. She prefers. He closed the refrigerator. He walked to the stove. He pointed to the back burner, the small pot's position, worn into the surface from months of use in the same exact spot. And this is where you put her food. Emeka. I cook separately for her because she has a sensitive stomach. There is no sensitive stomach. His voice did not rise. There is no doctor's schedule. I called Dr. Nuiz this afternoon. I asked him specifically what dietary restrictions he had given my mother. He said none. He said she should eat well and regularly. Those were his exact words. He paused. Those were his exact words, Adiz. She shifted on her feet. Her mouth opened and closed. The doctor today at the hospital told me my mother is malnourished. He let that word sit between them. Malnourished. My mother. In my house. With food in the refrigerator. With money in the account. With a kitchen 10 steps from her bedroom. My mother is malnourished. I didn't. Adi's voice cracked. She pressed her hand to her mouth. Her eyes filled. Emeka, I would never intentionally. Don't. He said it softly, almost gently, which was worse. Please don't. She tried a different approach. She sat down at the kitchen table. She let the tears fall properly. I know I haven't been perfect. I know things haven't always been right. But I love this family. I love you. I love Mama. She was eating cold food in the dark. His voice finally shifted, not to anger, but to something rawer. Something that had been living under all that calm. At 2 a.m, standing up, because by the time everyone else was fed, there was nothing left. My mother, the woman who starved herself so I could eat, who worked herself half to death so I could go to school, was standing in my kitchen in the dark, at 2 a.m, eating leftovers from a pot on the back burner. He stopped. He pressed his fist against his mouth for a moment. I built this house for her, he said. Before I built it for anyone else. I built it for her. The silence that followed was absolute. It was into this silence that the front door opened, quietly, without a knock, the way a person enters when they have been given permission and have decided not to wait for it to be revoked. Mrs. Nwachukwu stood in the doorway of the kitchen, her handbag over one arm, having let herself in with the spare key she had been given years ago. She had heard about Mama from a mutual neighbor. She had come immediately. She looked at Adi's. She looked at Emeka. She looked at the small pot on the back burner. She sat down at the kitchen table across from Adi's and said nothing. She did not need to say anything. There are women whose silence is louder than speech, and Mrs. Nwachukwu was one of them. Adi's looked at the table. I will ask you to leave my kitchen, she said, her voice thin. I will leave when Chioma comes home, Mrs. Nwachukwu said pleasantly. I have known that woman longer than you have known her son. I am not going anywhere. Emeka put his hand on Mrs. Nwachukwu's shoulder briefly, a thank you that required no words, and walked out of the kitchen. Mama Okafor came home 11 days later. 11 days of 4 fluids and proper meals and nurses who checked on her every few hours and a body that slowly, stubbornly, began to remember what it felt like to be fed. Emeka was at the hospital every single day. He took the morning visit before work and the evening visit after. He sat with her and watched television. He brought her the garden egg stew she loved from a restaurant near his office, because hospital food was hospital food and his mother deserved better. On the 4th day, he found the letter. He had gone home to pick up a change of clothes for her and had opened her Bible looking for the bookmark she had asked him to bring. The letter fell out from between the pages. He caught it. He unfolded it. He read it standing in the middle of his mother's room. He read it twice. He sat down on the edge of her bed, her small, narrow bed with its carefully folded wrapper at the foot, and he held the letter in both hands and he wept. Not quietly, not composed. He wept the way men weep when they have held everything in for too long and the container finally gives. With his whole body, bent forward, hands over his face, the letter pressed against his chest. Whatever happens, I am proud of you. You have always been a good son. She had written this from a place of hunger. She had written this while eating cold food in the dark. She had written it to protect him, to make sure that if something happened to her, he would not blame himself. She had been starving and her instinct had been to comfort him. He sat in her room for a long time. When he stood up, something in him had reorganized itself. The grief was still there. The guilt was still there. But beneath them both, clear and quiet and completely decided, was a resolution so firm it felt like it had been there all along, just waiting for this moment to reveal itself. Things were going to change in this house. Permanently. Immediately. Without negotiation. The conversation he had with Adiz that evening was not loud. It was, in many ways, more frightening than loud would have been. He sat across from her at the same kitchen table and he told her, in plain and measured language, exactly how things would be from that day forward. Mama Okafor would eat first. Full plate. Fresh food. Every meal. Ngozi would not be punished, dismissed, or made uncomfortable for what she had shared. If Adiz made a single move against Ngozi, she would be answering for it. There would be one pot, one kitchen, one standard of care for everyone under this roof. And then he said the thing that landed heaviest. I have been thinking about what kind of man allows this to happen in his own house, and I don't have a good answer. I was here every night and I did not see what was happening to my own mother. That is on me. But I see it now. And what I see now will determine everything going forward. Adiz sat very still. We have things to work through, he said. You and I. Things I don't yet know if we can work through. But my mother is coming home in 1 week. And when she walks through that door, this house will be different. That is not a conversation. That is a fact. He got up. He went to his study. He closed the door. Adiz sat at the kitchen table alone for a long time. The day Mama Okafor came home, the house was ready for her. Emeka had arranged everything. Her room aired out, fresh flowers on the windowsill, her Bible on the pillow. Ngozi had cooked her oaf akwu from scratch, the proper version, the way Mama had once taught her in a rare, warm afternoon in the kitchen. The whole house smelled of it. The children were at the door when the car pulled up. Chidinma ran out first, always the boldest, and wrapped her arms around Mama Okafor's waist in the driveway before she had even properly gotten out of the car. Mama laughed. A real laugh, full and surprised. Samto stood at the door with his hands in his pockets in that 11-year-old way that means I care but I'm pretending I don't. And Tabena, 14, the oldest, the one who had barely looked up from his phone at dinner all those months, came forward without being prompted and took Mama's bag from Emeka's hand. I've got it, he said simply. Mama Okafor looked at him. She was not the kind of woman who missed things. She had not missed the change in this household, though no one had explained it to her directly. She had felt it in the quality of her son's visits at the hospital, in the way he had held her hand, in the way no one had offered platitudes or easy reassurances. She had a sense, the sense of a woman who had survived too much to be easily deceived, that something significant had shifted. She touched Tabena's face briefly, just her fingers against his cheek. You're a good boy, she said. He nodded, looked down, carried the bag inside. They sat at the table, all of them together. Emeka at the head, Mama Okafor to his right, the children filling in the rest. Adiz moved in and out of the kitchen, quieter than usual, her movements careful and deliberate. She came out with Mama's plate first, a generous cut of the best piece of meat sitting at the center. She set it in front of Mama Okafor without ceremony, without performance. Eat well, Mama, she said. It was the plainest thing she had ever said in that kitchen. It had no audience, no Emeka watching the moment, no children to perform for, no neighbors to impress. Just a plate and an old woman and 4 words that were perhaps the most honest thing Adiz Okafor had ever said to her. Mama Okafor looked at the plate. She looked up at Adiz. She nodded once. Thank you, my daughter. She picked up her spoon. She ate. The table filled with the noise of a family. Spoons on plates, children talking over each other, Emeka asking about someone's school project, the television murmuring from the sitting room. It was ordinary noise. It was the best kind of noise. Nobody mentioned what had happened. Nobody needed to. There is something this story asks us to sit with, and it is this: hunger does not always announce itself. It does not always look like a child in an aid campaign photograph or a man begging at a traffic light. Sometimes hunger lives in a clean house with a generator that never runs out of fuel. Sometimes it sits at a dinner table every evening, dressed in a housecoat, smiling patiently, saying it already ate. We are living in a time when distance has made it easier than ever to tell ourselves that the people we love are fine. A phone call, a voice note, a video call where everyone smiles because nobody wants to be the one who makes the call heavy. But a video call cannot see how thin someone's wrists have gotten, cannot taste what is in the small pot on the back burner, cannot sit with an old woman at 2 in the morning and see what she is eating in the dark. Emeka loved his mother. He had always loved her. But love without attention is not protection. Love without presence is not care. He had trusted the surface of things, and the surface of things had been very carefully arranged. Check on your elders, not just with a call, with your eyes, with your hands, with a plate that you serve yourself full and place in front of them and watch them eat. And if you are the one quietly enduring right now, eating the leftovers, taking up as little space as possible, telling everyone you are fine, hear this clearly. You are not a burden. You are not an afterthought. You are not someone to be rationed. You deserve a full plate, a warm plate. In your own child's home, in your own family, you deserve to be fed. Your silence has protected others long enough. If this story moved you, if it made you think of someone, if it made you feel something you needed to feel, then I need to ask you to do something right now. Share this video, not just to share it. Share it with intention. Send it to your brother or your sister who is far away and trusts that someone is watching over your parents. Send it to your family WhatsApp group. Send it to the person in your life who needs to hear this story even if they don't know they need to hear it. You might be sending someone the wake-up call that changes everything. You might be the reason an old woman somewhere gets a full plate tonight. And in the comments, I want to ask you one question. Just one. When did you last personally make sure your mother or your father ate well? Not assumed, not guessed, not trusted that someone else was handling it. Actually made sure with your own eyes. Tell me in the comments. I read them, every one. And if you believe that every elder deserves dignity, a warm room, a full plate, and a seat at the table in the home their sacrifices helped build, type the word dignity in the comments right now. Let someone scroll through and see that word repeated 100 times. Let it mean something. If you are new here, welcome. This is a place where stories are told with honesty, with heart, and with the kind of detail that makes you feel like you were in the room. Every week, we bring you a new story rooted in family, truth, culture, and the things we carry quietly. Subscribe so you never miss one. Join this family. Until next time, take care of each other. Take care of your mothers. Take care of your fathers. And if you haven't called home in a while, put down this phone, pick it up again and dial. Someone is waiting to hear your voice.